Welcome to the Future Media Podcast. I'm Ricky Sutton.
And I'm Alan Chappell. And this podcast goes deep into the collision of big tech
and the future of the world.
We explore how companies like Google, Meta, and Apple are impacting each of our lives.
I'm an investigative journalist.
I'm a privacy lawyer.
And every week we speak with experts to bring the unreported details into the light. Good morning and welcome to the Future Media Podcast, where we report on the collision of big tech and big media and how to get to the better future together. Now, I'm joined as always by privacy lawyer and tech aficionado Alan Chappell. How are you today, mate?
I'm doing great, Ricky. How you doing?
Mate, I'm really good. How's your week been?
Week has been wonderful. We are gearing up to head to Europe, so I'm trying to get a whole bunch of things done this week. But other than that, you know, you can't be too unhappy thinking about heading to Puglia.
Yeah, mate. You're going to Italy. I'm going to Paris and on to London, mate. So maybe our paths will cross somewhere over there. We'll see.
Fantastic.
Now, I can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to this discussion because we're on a topic that really is at the forefront of my mind and what I think is going to become one of the biggest talking points and potentially game changers in our industry for the past 25 years. So the world's 4 billion web users access the World Wide Web through Chrome, or at least 2/3 of them do. It's the browser that's become effectively the operating system of the World Wide Web. It's on all our desktops, it's on almost all the iPhones, it's on every Android phone. And if you use the web, and if you're watching this on the web, you're most likely using Chrome. But after Google's 3 antitrust losses in the courts, the US Department of Justice has demanded that Google hands Chrome over to a new owner or a new custodian, someone new who can innovate, invest, and make Chrome better for users rather than a colossal data magnet for Google's advertising business. Now, I'm really looking forward to this one because I have a million opinions. I know Alan does, and I get asked about this all the time by publishers and CTOs around the world. So today, we're going to get some real expert opinion on that. So I'm joined, or Alan and I are joined, by Alyssa Cooper, the Executive Director of the Knight Georgetown Institute, which connects research with tech policy. Welcome. And by Eric Riscola, the Senior Research Fellow there and a former CTO of Firefox. Welcome to you both.
Good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Great to have you. Now, look, it's fair to say Alan and I have done some considerable amounts of reading on this breakup effectively, or this potential for Chrome to come under new control. I did the research the other day using my GPT of how many research documents I'd read, and it was more than 1 million words. And so I know that I've deeply read in. What I've found, though, is that amongst the C-suite executives of the world's media companies, they don't really quite understand what the opportunity is here and what they can potentially do with it, okay? And so what would happen in a world where Chrome perhaps wasn't controlled by Google, but by somebody else, or perhaps was even controlled by a consortium of the world's publishers, which I've been arguing for a long time. Now, the research, Alyssa, I'll come to you first. The research that you've done has broadly focused on what are the actual technical implications of how this would be done. And it feels like quite a big job, and that's probably a massive understatement. So I wonder if you could tell me about this report that you've done and what your key findings have been.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe just to start with the genesis of this report and why Eric and I put it together. We observed the recent remedies trial in the Google search antitrust case here in the US. And there were technical experts who offered testimony. There were witnesses from both sides. But really, the treatment of this question of the technical feasibility of this divestiture, it was incomplete at best and a little bit enraging, I would say, at worst, for folks with a technical background. So we decided to do a deep dive to really take a look at all the different pieces you would need to have in place if you wanted to successfully complete this change of ownership from Google to a new owner for Chrome. And I think part of maybe the source of a little bit of that rage is in our experience as folks who've been around the web and internet technologies and markets for a long time. One thing that you see that you can observe with your own eyes is that some of the proof of this is already evident in the market. There are other browsers that operate on par with Chrome that are as performant, as secure, in some cases have a better or different feature set. And you see this, you see this from Microsoft Edge, you see it from Apple Safari, and you see it from Firefox from Mozilla. Those together with Chrome are kind of the top four major browsers in terms of usage worldwide. And so that's really kind of the first proof point, is just that we already know that it's possible to operate a performant browser independent from Google because multiple other companies do. And then when we go one level deeper and we look at the basis for Chrome, that's where we get to Chromium, the open source project on which Chrome is based. And there's actually like more than 24 other browsers in the market today that are based on Chromium, including Microsoft Edge. And so what we get to is that the real question is whether, is Chrome so embedded in Google that it really couldn't be separated out in some way that would make this divestiture infeasible. And so we sort of tick through the different components that you would need in order to do this separation. We look at the proprietary technology that's embedded in Chrome, like Google owns. And some of that is licensable by a separate entity. Some of it is services that Google runs and that you would need some sort of handoff, or that you would perhaps want Google to continue running. And in some cases that Google has an incentive to continue running some of the security services like safe browsing. So that's sort of the first core set of questions that we look at, the actual technology. And what we find is that indeed there are pathways, some of which already exist in the market. And you can look at existing browsers, you can see how they would work. Others that would have to be developed de novo, but where there are precedents in from other sectors that you could follow, or where there's like a sort of obvious design pattern that you could follow. So that's sort of the technical side. Then we also look at the personnel side, and this also came up in the trial. So this question of whether Google is the only place in the world that has the engineers who are skilled enough to be able to operate this piece of software. And of course, if you look at the media industry, you look at the technology industry, you see spin-offs and mergers all the time, and you see what happens when personnel move with the technology and when they don't. It's for an engineering effort of this size, it would obviously be the easiest if the new owner of Chrome could retain the bulk of the Chrome team, right? You have all that embedded knowledge base and whatnot. But it's also the case that even in today's market, browser engineers move from one company to another. There's a lot of expertise outside of Google at these other companies that have been running similarly complex pieces of software. And so it's not really the case that if every engineer is going to stay at Google, nor is it the case that it would be sort of impossible for this new buyer to recruit technologists from other companies to be able to make this software work. So certainly the new owner would need to invest in recruiting people, in retaining them, and compensating them appropriately. But there's nothing that really indicates to us that any of that would be infeasible. And so when we get to kind of the end of this analysis, looking at the technology and the personnel, and we also kind of look at the governance of Chromium, our conclusion is that indeed this divestiture is feasible.
Interesting. So, Eric, amongst the four of us on this call, I believe you're the only one that's built a browser. I wonder if you could tell us, or at least run one. Could you tell me a little bit about your experience in that space, and how you see this as effectively as a project? What's the T-shirt size, if you like, in tech terms, on something like this?
Yeah, I mean, the TLDR, it's a big job, right? I mean, a browser is a huge artifact, and like just running the browser day to day is a big artifact. Is a big job. Even ignoring the split. So I mean, and so no one's going to tell you like this is like a trivial undertaking. That's not the way to think about it, right? So I think I think we have to separate out like what's required to run the thing day to day from what it's like to divorce Chrome from Chromium. Sorry, Chrome from Google rather. And and we mostly focus on the thing on the second question, which is what it's like to break it apart. And so really, as Alyssa said, what you have to do is systematically go through every part of Chrome where there is some special Google sauce and figure out whether you're going to keep it, whether you're going to replace it, or whether you're just going to get rid of it entirely. And there are things that fall into all three categories. So Alyssa alluded earlier, for instance, to safe browsing. It's an essential part of like a modern browser, and you have to have something like safe browsing. And the best way to get that probably is get it from Google in continuing. Google has reasons to continue to run it. They use it for their own products anyway. It seems unlikely they'd just shut it down, and they could be required to continue it, to provide it to Chrome, the new Chrome company. Just to make clear, they already provide it to, like, to a substantial number of other browsers. So it's not like this would be a change of pace. It would be the same thing. So Firefox, for instance, uses safe browsing. There's a second tranche of things which are important and you need somehow, but you don't need Google's version. So a good version of this, example of this, is updating facility. So a modern browser automatically updates very often, daily, weekly, whatever. And this is a critical part of maintaining the browser because you have defects, you have changes, and you have to make sure people get the updated version as soon as possible. So there is a set of tooling around this called Omaha, which is what Chrome uses. And it's built into the Chromium, into Chromium, so you can just run it in Chromium. But you need to provide the server component that gives you the new version, right? And so the good news is there are open source implementations of Omaha, so you can run one yourself. It's engineering to move it, but it's doable, right? And then there's a third sort of category of things, which are things that you might not want to do at all. So Google has extensive AI integration in Chrome now, right? AI is an area of real innovation. I imagine any modern browser company will want to have some AI integration, but it's not at all obvious they want to have the same AI integration Google has. And they may not want to integrate with Gemini. They might want to integrate with some other AI provider. And so there's an example of something which you might just strip out and replace with entirely your own code. They're something entirely different. And I think, at the very end, there probably are features which, maybe people don't want at all. So for instance, there is Google account integration. And maybe, whoever this is does not want to integrate with Google accounts. They don't have any account system. And you see that, for instance, Brave does not really operate like an account system so much for their browser sync. They have a separate thing, right? And so I think there's a whole variety of things. And the trick is to sort of systematically remove these things one at a time while keeping the thing running. And so I think Alyssa may want to talk about this briefly, but one thing we focus on in this report is what kind of transition assistance Google has to be required to provide to make sure you get a clean break. Because certainly you could say, well, today it's owned by Google and tomorrow it's owned by the buyer and nothing, and Google won't do anything. And that will have a not great experience. But the experience you want is that tomorrow the users just get the new version of Chrome from the acquirer, and it continues to function in a reasonable fashion, between that moment and when Google's completely out of the picture.
I think that's amazing. So 2.5 years ago, let's cast our minds back because so much has changed over those days. As it's head spinning. 2.5 years ago, virtually no one would have said it was likely. Well, very few of us would have said it was likely that Google was going to lose 3 for 3 in its antitrust cases, and very few people would have said that divesting Chrome would have been something that was even plausible. It would have been completely out. You'd be out of your mind for even suggesting it. And yet here we are. And so I think the fascinating thing for me that I learned through the trial was just how much the open web that we have today relies upon Chromium in terms of its market share and what it actually does. So Alyssa, could you please explain to me Chromium, the kind of logic behind it, and just how much it controls the web experience of 4 billion people, because it's kind of in everything, everywhere.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can start, and Eric has deep familiarity with this, so he can jump in as well. So Chromium is the open source project that underlies Chrome itself, and contains, the bulk of the complexity of the software that goes into Chrome. It's been open sourced, I think, since basically since Google took it over many years ago. And as a result, that means that there's a bunch of other browsers that are also based on Chromium. I mean, it essentially gives you, if you want to develop your own browser, it gives you a product out of the box that, with a small amount of tailoring, you can turn into your own branded browser if you're somebody other than Google. As an open source project, Google is by far the largest contributor to it, although there are other contributors, including Microsoft, Intel, and others. And Google essentially controls the governance of it as well. So Google is really in a decisional role about what changes happen to the code base of Chromium. And what that means for those other browsers that are based on Chromium is that they get a nice sort of performant code base from the efforts that Google and others put into it, but they're also subject to the being downstream of the changes that Google wants to make to it, and that are more aligned with Google's own business incentives and objectives than whatever the downstream users of it are. So that just creates additional effort and work that these other browser companies have to put in. Whenever Google pushes changes to the code base, they then have to update. And if the way that they've designed their additional features is overly dependent on the things that Google decided to change, then they're stuck having to accommodate those changes somehow. I would say, like as you said at the beginning, Chrome itself has 4 billion users, a little over 4 billion users, and something like 65% of the market worldwide. And Edge is also based on Chrome and is one of the top 4 browsers. There are 2 other what we call the browser engine that serves to power really all the backend functions of the browser, and that's WebKit from Apple and Gecko from Firefox. And so you do see differentiation in terms of what you get from these different browsers. It's not like complete homogeneity for all web users, but certainly Chrome and Chromium are the largest, and that's what makes, I think, this asset so attractive to people who have started to be turned on to the idea that it might be up for grabs.
Amazing. And so, Eric, could I just ask you, let's put yourself in the seat of someone that sees themselves as a future custodian of Chrome. Do you buy it or do you build it? See, this is one of the big conversations that keeps coming up. If you've got Chromium as open source, do you take Chrome as is and adapt it to what you want it to be for a new World Wide Web and open web? Or do you take Chromium and now suddenly, there was a great line actually in the antitrust trial when Satya Nadella just basically said that investment in search and browsers was the biggest no-fly zone in Silicon Valley because there was no way to compete with Google's monopoly on those 2 things. But now we have an opportunity that there might be investment, there might be VC capital to build. I saw Perplexity announced yesterday that it wants to have a go at an AI-based browser. This feels like an innovation that's been a long time coming that perhaps hasn't managed to have its day in the sun. So is this a build or buy moment if you were sat in this mix?
So I think maybe it's important to talk about what it is you're building versus buying. So it is not practical to write a new browser from scratch in 2025. It is an enormously expensive proposition. And the most difficult part about it is not that browsers are technically complicated, but that the behavior of a browser is technically intricate. And so what you need is to have a situation where every website in the world renders roughly the way it renders now in Chrome, but in your new browser. And just getting what you'd call bug for bug compatibility is like an incredibly difficult proposition in terms of engineering time. So I don't think any person would say, I'm going to write this from scratch. So you would definitely take an existing engine. That's like a no-brainer. Now, which engine you would take? I think the broad industry consensus, you would take Chromium. And the reason for that is the same reason, which is that websites are designed to work well with Chromium. So it's not a matter of Chromium being better or worse than another engine. It's a matter of Chromium being market dominant. And so people make sure their browsers work, their sites work with Chrome, where they don't perhaps make sure they work with Safari or Firefox. So I think that's the first thing. On the other side of the equation, the most important asset in this system is actually not the software. It is access to the Google Update channel, which is the ability to give somebody your new browser, whatever it is. Because without that, you got to get everybody to go and download it yourself, and now you're starting from 0. Whereas if you start from the Google Update channel, you're starting from whatever Google's market share is. So those are the 2 sort of like poles of the situation. In terms of whether you start with raw Chromium and build up, or you start from Chrome existing and tear down, those are like engineering questions, but frankly, they're less interesting engineering questions than the ones we just talked about.
Fascinating. I love this.
Can I challenge that maybe a little bit? And I'm going to do
Please.
this as admittedly the least technical person by a mile here. But I'm going to tell you a quick little story. 15 years ago, a group of tech guys and I were trying to get Microsoft to put in an extension into Internet Explorer. Microsoft nicely agreed to do it. We spent like 6 months. It was not a very complicated thing, but there was so much bloat within Internet Explorer for a whole host of reasons that it ended up being, I don't know if anything is impossible in technology, but it was certainly infeasible. So there's so much bloat that is Google bloat within the Chrome browser right now. Google has been running Chrome as a loss leader for a whole bunch of other businesses, including its ad tech business. I mean, like, I would not be surprised if there was some backdoor to their ad server or their ad exchange that, like, we just, like, again, I'm a non-tech person, but that's sort of the suspicion in ad tech circles, is that there's a whole bunch of stuff in there. And so walk me off the ledge around, like, how, because you make it sound really easy, but walk me off the ledge as you start pulling this stuff out of Chrome. Is the thing going to work the same?
Well, I didn't mean to make it sound really easy. And I certainly have no idea what is in Chrome that is not in Chromium, that is secret. There's obviously stuff that's in Chrome that's not in Chromium that is public, for instance, various media codecs. But the good news is you can, if you're given the Chrome source code and the Chromium source code, you can simply look to see exactly what's in Chrome is not in Chromium. And so at that point, you will have an opportunity to set, and Chrome, like all modern pieces of software, is designed in a componentized fashion. This componentization is imperfect, but in a componentized fashion. And so you can go and you can look at every single piece and be like, what does this thing do? And what does this thing do? I don't want that, and I want this. And certainly as part of any proposed divestiture, you would intend to have Google provide the technical assistance required to help you diagnose what every single thing is. I don't mean to suggest that this is a straightforward, this is an easy proposition. It is a lot of actual work. But what it is boundable, understood engineering work rather than research work.
Fair.
And I'll just add one bit of gloss on that, which is that process that Eric outlined, like, that's the systematic process that a responsible buyer would go through. What happened during the trial is that they had their technical expert witness who got a copy of Chrome, turned off access to google.com servers, and then opened the browser and said, what's broken? And then went through this litany of, like, all the different services that are broken when you try to run Chrome without access to google.com. And, like, no reasonable buyer in their right mind would approach the task of rebuilding Chrome into whatever they wanted it to be in that manner, because that's, like, nonsense, because we all know that the browser is deeply integrated with Google services. But a new buyer wouldn't necessarily want it to be, or they could pick and choose, and they would go through it systematically. And that's, like, more the way to think about how you would end up with a rebranded version of this piece of software than, like, just trying to in a sort of blunt way, imagine, like, suddenly you can't access Google. Then what do you do with this browser? Like, that's not realistic.
I would add one more thing, which is we do actually kind of have a very helpful roadmap here, which is that, Brave went and built a version of Chromium-based browser, Brave, using Chromium, not using the Google proprietary code. And so one thing to realize is actually a fair amount of the sort of stuff that interfaces with Google is already in Chromium. It's just, like, turned off, basically, right? And so Brave went through the exercise of taking everything that was, like, important, that they thought it was important, at least, in Chromium that talked to some Google service, and replacing it with whatever they thought was better. And so you can just go look at the Brave source code, and they've done a really good job of documenting this. And we relied quite heavily on that during our analysis, and figure out which pieces they thought they had to replace, and go and be like, well, I'll have to do something very similar myself. So this is actually, again, like, running a browser is a very large engineering effort, even if you already own it and are running it the way it's supposed to, the way it was run from the beginning. So don't expect the divestiture to be like a 5-minute operation, but it is a bounded engineering operation that we kind of have a roadmap for already.
Yeah, I'd like to get to that, the technical committee and the actual breakdown and some of that stuff in a moment. But I just want to share something with you the first time that I became fundamentally aware of the power and the danger of the browser, okay, being under Google's control was, and this is a bit of a trip back in time for some of you, but most publishers and most users, I don't think even know what a browser is or even think about what a browser is. For them, it's just the internet. Okay, it's just they come in, they go into there, they don't even think about that first click. It's just what happens to get to the internet, right? It's the door. But I was running video for a host of global publishers, and our video businesses were growing very quickly, 30% quarter on quarter. We were reporting the news better. We were putting a relevant video in every article. We were helping drive what we saw as the future of the audio and visual web. We were closing the gap between broadcast and digital. You know, consumers were loving it. Every video was being completed. We were able to cover news in ways that we'd never done before. We were on a very fast journey to building a very interesting new multimedia web that was commercially popular, popular with advertisers and with consumers and with journalists. Doesn't happen very often. And then one day there was an announcement that that Google was going to change all the codecs for video. It was going to require everybody to move to HTML5. It was going to turn off autoplay in all examples and ensure that audio was off. And the result of all of those things was argued as this is a better user experience. I'll decide what's the best user experience for my readers. Thanks very much. That's why it says editor in my title. I will not be edited by unrelatable, unaccountable technicians on the other side of the world hidden in an office that won't talk to me. Just doesn't happen. People have been to war when governments have tried to silence journalism. I don't want to be silenced by engineers. And so we had this conversation with Google and they were like, no, we're going to do this anyway. Okay, we don't care what you think at all. And what you saw was all the advertising that was going to the publishers was now disenabled by the fact that it had to be click to play and audio on. And all the advertising flowed directly to YouTube, which, by the way, for anybody that doesn't know, is owned by Google. And it's these kinds of abilities to silence entire industries with a change of a code or a codec in the background that massively damages our ability to use the web as a service for all rather than a service for one. So I'm sorry to get on my high horse there, but that was a very, very clear example. So I can tell you that one publisher in the US that you guys would know off the top of your head went from $100 million in revenue to 6, okay, with that change, all right? And when you add lots of those together, it's why the industry's in the kind of parlous state that it's in today. So let's talk about technical committees, because if we are going to give the World Wide Web back to the users and go back to servicing the 4 billion people rather than just Google, we're going to need to go through some work. So can you explain to me how, or how advanced do you think it is and realistic is it to put together a 3-person executive committee with 2 more added to it to make this change? And what do you think are the real challenges that technical committee faces?
Yeah, for sure. I think this has been like a real flashpoint in the trial, and these antitrust cases. There've been a few of them, but they don't come along that often. So everyone sort of draws their mind back to Microsoft, and there's been a few others where they established these technical committees. So there's some precedent, but there's also like a big space to try to figure out what makes the most sense here. And I think as of this moment, we don't know too much about exactly how this is going to look. The plaintiffs have made a proposal, and as you said, they have a sort of each plaintiff gets to appoint somebody. Google gets to appoint somebody, and then the 3 of those people choose 2 more. We don't know what the judge is going to do. Really, he could come up with some alternative structure for creating this all together. I do think the sort of it's a maybe a little bit cute that the plaintiff said that because there's 2 plaintiffs, both the Department of Justice and the state AGs, that they each get to pick one. I'm sure Google will object to that because it gets you a little bit of the 2 against 1 dynamic. But in any event, we'll see what happens with the composition of that one, and it'll be also interesting to see how that composition relates to. There's a technical committee proposed in the Epic v. Google litigation. I'm sure there's going to be one proposed in the ad tech case as well. So there's a lot of moving pieces here. But I think the main thing to realize, and this definitely comes back to the Microsoft precedent, is that you get the number of people that you get in terms of these formally designated appointments. But what you really need is for this technical committee to be able to have the hiring authority and the spending authority to bring on additional staff and consultants with a variety of different kinds of expertise. And if you look at the full sweep of the remedies being proposed in this case, and imagine that the judge adopts, some or potentially all of them, that expertise needs to be really wide. You need people who understand security and can evaluate potential, what they call qualified competitors, like buyers or other companies that are going to receive data from Google according to a specific set of security standards. You need people, you need user experience people, you need people who know about UX design to evaluate choice screens potentially that are going to be presented to users. You need people who can suss out if Google has data sharing requirements and they're going to do syndication. Um, is their syndication API complete? In terms of this divestiture, you need people who can say, is Google providing adequate technical support to transition the services? Are they dragging their feet? Are they providing what the court orders them to provide? You might need people with privacy expertise if there's click and query data sharing. You might need people with more of an economic background if some of the remedies require or allow Google to charge competitors for access to certain data or certain APIs. And you need this body to be able to also advise the court sort of appointed monitors or trustees who are going to be the ones who are fielding complaints from competitors about non-compliance. So that, if you take that all together, that's like a fairly comprehensive task. We actually wrote a report back last fall about sort of considerations for effective search remedies that goes into this in a lot more detail. And really what we came out with at the end was like, man, this technical committee is really going to need to be staffed up. And again, if you look at the president from Microsoft, I think the court appointed people were three, similar, one from each side, and then they appointed a third. But for much of the life of that technical committee, there were actually 40 or more people involved. And so I think you can imagine this at a similar level of complexity, or perhaps more, depending on what the judge goes for. And so really it needs to be set up for success. It needs to be set up so that it can hire, so that it can pay people, so that it can invest in the data and the research that it needs to do in order to carry out all of those tasks effectively.
The thing that I find fascinating, and Alan and I have been talking to the FTC and the DOJ about this recently, is that after 25 years of effectively a fairly dogmatic approach to antitrust, which is the market will fix itself, which is my very shorthand version of what Alan's been telling me about the complexities here, where economics or economists are saying, the market will fix itself, we'll be fine, don't worry, just let free market express itself and we'll win at the end. What we've seen through the Cantor Khan era, and what's fascinated me, is that we've seen very much a change to what's more of a real world outcome, what real consumers are actually feeling. And then not only that, but they've both opened the door to real experts in the space, not economists, but actual journalists and actual technologists and actual privacy people. And so we're kind of getting a more realistic view of what a breakup looks like. And so I'm fascinated by who they're going to pick for this technical committee. And Alyssa, to your point, the one person appointed by the government, the one person appointed by Columbia as the state that led the complaint, and a representative from Google that isn't a Google employee. I must admit, I had a bit of a wry grin when I read that, because you can just immediately see Google going, well, we're not getting much of a say in there. And I'm pretty sure we run the entire internet, right? And you can just imagine somebody at the DOJ going, you're an illegal monopolist. We have a different opinion on that. Okay, so thank you. You do run the web, but that's the whole point of the monopoly that we're explaining here. And that's why we want to change it. So I am actually fascinated to see who, if they go with this technical community, and then if they do, who they appoint. But you're saying, Alyssa, I think, that you think that this will be 5 people, but another 200 people below it. Is that what you're seeing? And and then a long length of time for this thing to play out.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess what I would say it comes down to is like these sort of like governance issues are always like the most fundamental question. Eric and I have both spent decades working in these like industry forum, technical standards bodies, where the absolute most important thing is like who has decisional authority over what. So I don't want to minimize the importance of the composition of those court appointed slots themselves, like that's the number one question that you're going to have to answer before you can do the rest of it. But I do think people I just want to sort of dispel this myth that it's like you look at all these things that this committee is supposed to do, and then you expect that three people are going to have to do it all. It looks like more work than, three people's full-time job. And so I just think it's useful to look back to what has happened in prior cases and realize that, like, if they are able to bring in other people with different kinds of expertise, then you don't have to be expecting that among these three people, that between them they have this full gamut of expertise, because that's unrealistic. And B, that if there is more work than what they can accommodate, that they have the ability to reach out and bring that in, and that is really important in the construction of the committee. So it's important who they pick, and yes, it's like they set out some criteria, the plaintiffs do in their proposal. It's always tricky to find, like, who's available to do this particular job. It's not the kind of thing that comes around all the time. But I think equally important is the setting the committee itself up for success, which means it has to be able to bring in other expertise.
Agree completely. Also, it needs to be funded. One of the top 5 issues that I had with the process that the Competition and Markets Authority set up with respect to the privacy sandbox is, like, Google outlasted them. Those guys and they strangled them of resources because it took a lot of time and effort to keep up with all that quarterly report stuff. And so the CMA essentially, surrendered. And you really need to have a situation where that doesn't happen again, where Google is not entirely in charge of the process. And I think you aptly described that, but also funding. So somebody's got to fund this, and I'm assuming that's Google.
Yeah, I think they actually say that in the remedy. I think there's actually a statement in there where it says that, the monopolist should be the one that funds a lot of this work. Who are the other two people? Anybody want to have a go? Who are they, or what are they going to be? What's their job going to be? Because these two kind of like shadowy figures that are kind of thrown into this, what are they going to do, and who are they? And any thoughts?
I feel like there's a long list of people. I mean, heck, including at least to the people on the call here, there's a long list of people who have some pretty significant technical expertise, and are not overly conflicted for whatever reason. So I don't think you're going to have a trouble finding a really good slew of people who are ready to jump into this. I don't know. Does anybody disagree?
To be honest, that's not really my. I don't think there's a lack of people that want to do it. I mean, honestly, can you imagine that it's like rebuilding the printing press? It's the most exciting thing in the world. I can't imagine anything more amazing to be involved in. It's going to create the dissemination of global information for the next quarter century. It's a thrilling job. I mean, goodness. But I suppose my question is what type of people are these going to be? Who do they need to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, first of all, obviously in the construction of this, it's meant such that you have to get the opposing parties to agree on who the other people are. So that does limit, I think, the broad universe a little bit, but that's like by design, of course. But I think traditionally, what do you get? You get people who've been working as consultants, right? Or like software consultancy type of people. You get academics, you get ex-academics, people who sort of float between industry and academia. So I think, I agree with you. I think I obviously think this is super interesting. I'm so happy to be on this call with other people who are want to think about this all day the way that I do. But yeah, I think the universe of people is large. I think the hard part will be, getting the other people who the court appointed ones to agree. And again, like, we don't even know if these additional 2 slots are going to be part of what the judge goes for with respect to the technical committee, or if the judge goes for a technical committee at all. I mean, he definitely expressed some skepticism about it during at various points during the trial. So I think it's a lot of this is a lot of sort of speculation until we see what he really goes for.
Well, hopefully it's not akin to picking a jury where you end up getting like the least common denominator. I don't think that's going to happen. But I it's funny. I saw some of the criticism from the judge about the technical committee, but I felt like that was grounded in just frustration with how Google operates rather than oh, we can't do a technical committee, and here's this other thing that might work better. Like, I don't think there's any other, like, unless, does anybody here have any ideas? Like, I don't think there's another approach other than a technical committee that is funded by Google that even has a shot at getting done what needs to get done.
Yeah, I mean, I think the tricky part here is like if you look at past precedent, everyone goes back and looks at AT&T. Well, at AT&T, we had a designated regulator, right? We had the FCC, whose whole remit is to actually regulate the sector, and so you have a big expert body from which you can draw what you need in order to sort of govern and oversee a process like this. And in this case, we don't have one of those, and we're not going to have one, anytime in time um, for when the need is met after all the appeals are done. So yeah, I agree with you. I think nothing is perfect. Nothing is perfect about any of this. I'm sure you both have had this experience. The longer you think about these remedies, the more you can find where all of the holes are and all the deficiencies and the issues that you wished you could solve in a different way. But don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right?
Yeah, so I really appreciate that, and thank you for raising that, because one of the things that come up again and again and again with Alan and I is that the antitrust actions on these companies, not just Google, but let's look at Google in this moment, really are 6 or 7 years overdue, and they should have happened long before. And the remedies look so draconian because it wasn't done much earlier, when the market problem was clearly understood and clearly seen. And so that's why things look so dramatic now when you get to here and the changes you need to make. But given that and this is a question, given that the internet is now the experience of every single person, 4 billion people, it's 30% of the GDP of America and the S&P. It's probably the oil that runs the world today. Isn't this a time when we need an FCC for the internet so that we can oversee this kind of stuff in the future? Isn't that just a natural thing that ought to happen?
Good question. So I think, look, that there's probably been people who have been talking about that just as long, and they've been complaining about the lack of antitrust enforcement, right? So I think the sort of need has been well recognized for many years. I think you can see left, right, and center the institutional challenges to establishing that in the United States, particularly at this moment in time. Building a new regulatory agency is not on anyone's list among the people who have the capacity to cause that to come into fruition, right? Like, don't look to Congress for that to happen anytime soon, in my opinion. Um, but yeah, the need is clear. And when you look in other jurisdictions, you can see how this could work differently, right? So you see a CMA, you see a European Commission where, what did the European Commission do after many years uh, of, of sort of concern and lack of satisfaction with antitrust enforcement? They went forward with a broad-based regulation, the Digital Markets Act, which has been the law of the land for more than a year now. You can be celebrate its successes and criticize its failures, and that's going to be an ongoing process. But at least there's a vehicle to allow that to happen, and that's just not something that exists in the United States in a meaningful way. And I think if we look institutionally, it's not the low-hanging fruit, and that's why people are, I think, very focused on the antitrust cases, because, as you say, finally we have a suite of them. There will be an answer one way or the other at the conclusion of these cases, unlike the sort of endless churn around building a digital regulator, which at least to me feels kind of endless.
Yeah, right now the DOJ is kind of the only game in town. I know there's that separate state AG case, and the AGs are certainly, or the Republican AGs are certainly going to have their say. But it's hard for me to even think about what it would be like to bring in a different regulator, just given how befuddled and dysfunctional everything else is within how things are created within the US. I feel like this is the Obi-Wan, our last hope type of a scenario with respect to the DOJ. And so that's really mostly what I've been focusing on. Can I jump in with a question about the report? And this is more of a public policy question, but I was sort of fascinated that you had 4 preconditions for success for Chrome divestment. There was in criteria: personnel, Google's cooperation, support for an open source Chromium, and then a monetization strategy of the acquirer. And can you walk us through all of those? And I'd love to walk through them individually and then maybe talk a bit about how those might be interdependent a bit on each other. Eric, do you want to start?
So look, as I said a number of times, building a browser is a big job. And a browser is a complicated piece of technology. Just the job of like keeping the thing moving and advancing it is like complicated because the web is very complicated. And so in order to do that successfully, you need to have a good team of strong people. We have the additional challenge here, as Alyssa sort of alluded to, that when you're confronted with, millions of lines of source code, trying to figure out what they do is not always an easy proposition if you haven't worked with it. So, the highest priority is to be able to collect a team of people who really understand the web and really understand, browsers and really understand how to engineer on them. The second highest priority, but very high, is to collect enough of a critical mass of the existing Chrome team that you're not like having to like reverse engineer what the browser does from the very beginning. Those are the two things that I think are necessary to like be successful here. As Alyssa alluded to, there's plenty of experience with people moving from browser to browser. I know a number of people who worked at Firefox and who now work in Chrome. I know people who worked at Firefox who now work on Safari. So it's certainly something people do. So it's not like you're starting from scratch initially, but it's good to have someone give you the lay of the land. So the critical problem here is getting enough people. I think there's a lot of question about whether you'd be able to get them. At least suggestions from Google's side, you would not be able to get them.
Well, in fairness, it's a pretty expensive headcount. So it's not even just about whether you get them because you can convince them to join the team. There's a lot of money right now going into Google engineers with respect to Chrome. That sort of was a part of my earlier comment about it being a loss leader.
Yeah, so right. So I think let's like maybe put the monetization piece aside for a moment because Alyssa was talking about it. But I will say, there are people who run successful browsers who spend a lot less than Google allegedly spends on Chrome. And so I don't think it is like it is like you have to have like the revenue of Google to be able to support Chrome. So I think the question then is like, will you be able to get high quality people to want to come work on this? I think for the reasons were just being talked about a few minutes ago, I think the answer is yes. The answer is like the opportunity to shape the future of the web in a way that is actually where you actually are, working for the public interest and not, trying to figure out what like Google's ad tech people want or Google search people want. That's a real opportunity, and it's a real and whatever this is going to be a real open field where you're going to have like an opportunity to really shape things right away right out of the gate. I can tell you from working at Mozilla that one of the reasons Mozilla was able to retain such top quality people was because those people were on a mission and they knew Mozilla stood for something, and so they were like, yeah, we'll make less, but we're doing something we think is really important. So I think there are companies who could buy who could buy Chrome where you would not be able to get anybody good. I would hope that like that would not be the people who are allowed to buy Chrome. But I think the right acquirer, you really will get some really top quality people.
So fair enough, but that gets to, and I might bring this up in a minute more forcefully, but like in the Venn diagram of who can afford it and who the engineers necessarily want to work with, the overlap may not be as broad as one might hope. No?
That's why I'm so glad Alyssa agreed to take that section. Do you want to pivot to that, or should we talk about Chromium?
No, let's talk about Chromium.
Right. So obviously Chromium is like an open source project, right? And the great thing on open source is anybody can take it and do the thing they want, right? Chromium has benefited a huge amount over the years from Google's willingness to continue to engineer on it and to not just stuff in their own proprietary box, but actually make Chromium better. So like, I think Google deserves like real credit for like continuing to maintain Chromium the way they have. And what we want to make sure of, and I think they have not always done that in a way that I loved, and have not always done that in the direction I thought was best for the internet, but they have invested a huge amount of money in making Chromium better, and that's great. And so it is important that whoever buys Chrome continues to do that rather than basically making everything proprietary. Because otherwise, basically everyone else who depends on Chromium, which has been incredibly good for the web to have that diversity of people taking Chromium and doing things, It's been bad in some ways. We can talk about that as well, but it's been good in this particular way. Is basically in trouble. So I think we'll talk about this a little bit, but that it is important that whatever these preconditions are to to the divestiture do require that Chromium continues to be open source, and that the acquirer cannot just take it and close source everything.
So, and does the acquirer necessarily have to also be in charge of Chromium?
Yeah, no, they don't.
Maybe the Linux is the Linux Foundation even a possibility here?
I don't think it's like helpful to talk specifically about specific organizations. I think let's talk about generally about how open source governance works.
Well, I was just bringing them up because it seems like they've had an expanded role starting at the beginning of the year, and so I'm not here to advocate for them. To be honest with you, I don't know enough to even to advocate or not. But I'm just curious, like, is it, I guess what I would maybe rephrase the question and say, is the possibility of an independent association,
yes,
maybe the W3C circa, 20 years ago, is that even a possibility?
Yeah. So I think there basically are, I think, I would say maybe, two main models for like big open source projects. One is the one Chromium follows, where you have some big sponsor like Google. Firefox is well known this as well, basically, where they just can make most of the technical decisions and they take open source contributions, but fundamentally they're the dictator. And the other is the one I think you're alluding to, which is to have an independent organization which has some sort of like governance model that is not just like one dictator, and they try to make decisions in some, I don't know, democratic, but like some way that is like tries to take into account the needs of multiple stakeholders. LF is an example of an organization that kind of houses a bunch of things like that. There are other things like that. The Rust Foundation is kind of like this. I think OpenJS is like this with Electron. So there are other models like that. I think you could imagine having either model. I think the most important thing here though is whatever it is it's not designed in a way that it's going to be like it can be all closed and pulled back in again.
Can I just scale the size of Chromium? So from my reading of the documents, the court papers, I think Chromium had, and please help me out here, Eric. My understanding is that it has about 1,200 engineers, that it has an operating cost of about $4 billion a year, that that somewhere in the region of $220 billion of Google's revenue is effectively based on the work that Chromium does into Chrome and so forth. And there was also a piece that the costs of Chromium were rising at 6% year on year, but the revenue thrown off by Chrome in licensing and other things was rising at 18% year on year. And the reason I raise all that is because if it's an M&A, all of that, or merger and acquisition, or then all of those numbers are going to become relevant. Is that about right on the number of people, 1,200, Eric? Is that what do you understand it to be? Or is this a commercial question for you, Alyssa?
It is, because Alyssa has a whole report on this.
Perfect. Then I shall be quiet.
So in terms of the trial evidence, the number of engineers, or I think it was the number of staff that I saw when the Chrome executive testified was actually closer to 1,000, I think is what she said. And then the expense numbers and the revenue numbers, those weren't disclosed in the trial. They were disclosed to the parties. So there was a lot of like, this is a number in a red box. Make sure you don't reveal this number while you're speaking, because obviously the trial was open to the public. So the judge knows those numbers and the parties know those numbers, but we do not know those numbers. Now, before the trial, I did a bunch of analysis and wrote a piece in Tech Policy Press trying to estimate those costs because I was bothered by this sort of gap in the conversation, and also, frankly, this sort of broader phenomenon of this like sort of the web Stockholm syndrome, where people are so afraid of what the web could look like if we no longer have this monopolist who's bankrolling the whole thing, that they assume that the only way we could ever have a divested Chrome is if it has exactly the expenses and revenues of Chrome itself. That didn't quite seem right to me, given, frankly, the existence proof of Firefox in the market as well. So I tried to do some sort of back of the envelope math to figure this out. And in that analysis, I concluded that I think the estimated costs of running Chrome run somewhere in the $1 to $2 billion range. And the revenue that is attributed to Chrome is a minimum of 17 to 35 billion. Again, those are just like back of the envelope estimates based on the published financial documents from Google. I think what we did see in the trial in terms of how those numbers that they wouldn't reveal were characterized is that the revenue is much, much higher than the cost. And I think at one point they even talked about being order of magnitude higher. So I think our sort of collective intuition here on that seems broadly correct, even though we don't know the numbers. Now, by comparison, if we look at Firefox, Firefox is a nonprofit, so all of its financial information is public. And Firefox's expenses run closer to about $400 million a year. So if we look at that, what's the difference there? Well, certainly they have fewer people, like they don't have 1,000 engineers working on Firefox. And they pay them less. And those are, personnel costs are like the bulk of the cost of a piece of software like this. So if we think about Chrome and an equivalent product that also has a browser engine where you need to invest all that engineering effort, we should be thinking of a product that will cost somewhere in the hundreds of millions of dollars to run at a minimum, and where the buyer will want to have a viable business model that can exceed those costs and churn a profit. And so, I mean, if we want to talk about monetization now, I'm happy to sort of riff on that a little bit. So if that's kind of the numbers that we're thinking about, then we have to think how would a buyer monetize this? And again, here, when I'm asked this question, it's like, how on earth will this work? Because like, who could do it besides Google? And a lot of people, I think, use this frame of mind, which is very static. Like you sort of look at the world exactly as it is today and say, if there was, if Chrome got divorced from Google today, what would happen? But that's not the world that we're going to be in when Chrome gets divested, because we will also have other remedies in place. I mean, I can't imagine, probably the most unlikely scenario is that the judge only goes for the Chrome divestiture and none of the other remedies. So we just need to think about it in that context as well. And I would say the most important consideration is that Chrome has 4 billion users worldwide. And it is very rare that a product with 4 billion users goes onto the market, right? It's a larger software product than like most of the other products that are out there today. And so that's a lucrative asset. And you saw that come through in the trial where you have OpenAI and Perplexity and Yahoo and DuckDuckGo all saying like, yeah, this thing would be valuable if it was up for grabs. So with all of that as the context, then we can think about what are the potential avenues for monetization. And I think there's at least sort of 5 buckets of these. There's search, common one, obviously today. There's display advertising. There's AI. There's an enterprise business. Chrome already runs Chrome for Enterprise business. And then there's like funneling users to other services and the sort of cross subsidization like you get with Safari, for example. So if we think just about search for a second, this could be organic. It could be a company that runs a search engine. It could be a company that is making use of syndication APIs that are also required by the judge to build a search engine, which it uses to monetize the browser. Or it could be through contract. And one really important aspect that the plaintiffs emphasized in the case is that the remedies in this case only apply in the United States. So to the extent that the judge is going to prohibit Google, or potentially going to prohibit Google from contracting with independent browsers to be the default search engine, which seems quite likely given the way the case has gone, that only applies in the US. So this independent Chrome could potentially contract with Google outside the US to be its search provider. And currently, 80% of Chrome's users are outside the US. So that is a non-trivial potential amount of revenue. You can think what you want about it, given obviously that the whole trial is about combating Google's illegal monopoly, but that's just sort of a fact that would still be an option for this buyer. And then when we think about the competitiveness of the search market, hopefully there's, we grow over time multiple other search providers who are competing to be the default in this very important distribution channel, driving up the price that this distribution channel can charge to have a search provider. So I think search remains a super important avenue for revenue for this new buyer. When we think about display ads, we learned in the trial, Google already attributes some amount of display advertising to Chrome. So that's already like a way that they think about it as a company that runs an advertising business. There's examples out there of other browser companies that are running ad businesses to monetize. Brave does this. Opera does this. Firefox even does it with its little, tabs on the landing page that are sponsored, that kind of thing. And there's variations on this. Brave has like a rewards program or the sort of crypto token type of thing. So there's different ways that you can, I think, monetize through advertising potentially. And again, here there could be a syndication remedy, an ad syndication remedy that the buyer avails itself of to build its own ad business, which it then uses to monetize the browser. So that's search and display. Then we have AI. Of course, everyone wants to talk about AI throughout the entire trial. You had witnesses up there saying they not only that they were, interested potentially in purchasing Chrome, but they're really interested in doing distribution deals for their AI chatbots and their AI products. So that I think people are sort of expecting to be an avenue. And in addition to the chatbots, obviously we have this like newer style, the agentic, the potential to integrate agentic capabilities. And you can imagine that companies offering that want to pay a browser as a distribution channel for that. So I think those are kind of the main ones. Enterprise business, potentially not huge, but something that, getting big IT departments to pay to have a souped up version of the browser is a fairly common in enterprise software in general. And then, as I said, there's these other models where even like Google and Safari, where it's sort of like you're cross subsidizing, you have some other product, you're rolling your Chrome users into your identity management system that you use to funnel them to your other services. So I think it's contra the kind of natural tendency to be tearing our hair out to say like, how could somebody besides Google be able to monetize this? To me, it actually looks like there's a ton of possibility.
So the enterprise one is a really interesting one. I've had people suggest that like a JP Morgan or Chase could buy Chrome, and just the ability to remove a significant percentage of fraud from their footprint would in of itself be pretty valuable, because it's really, I've heard that it's pretty difficult the way Chrome is currently built. But I just want to challenge some of the monetization options that you're putting out there. Like, I don't disagree with them, and you're going to have to pay for this regardless. But number one, a lot of them sound an awful lot like status quo. And similarly, a lot of them sound like not great for privacy. I mean, do you agree? Disagree?
I mean, I know you guys have spent like many hours talking about like how do you do privacy preserving advertising. I tend to be like a believer that it is possible, and I would love to see the buyer here actually come out full throated and attempt to do privacy preserving advertising in the way that we believe to be possible, but have yet to see come to fruition because all the other actors in the space are not incentivized to actually make it happen. So that's my rose-colored glasses answer to that. But like, I don't think it's like outside the realm of possibility. Would love to see it happen.
Fair enough. And I want to see more investment in that. The challenge right now with some of the privacy preserving techniques, there's probably threefold. Number one, you have a monetization issue with that, because it's not going to monetize nearly as well. And so that's a consideration. I'm not saying it's the only consideration. Second thing is that a lot of the browser based, even ID free or privacy safe monetization plans still rely on grabbing URL from a publisher. Now, my understanding is that publishers don't really want other people taking the fact that you visited on, the NewYorkTimes.com and leveraging that downstream. They are not happy with that just from an intellectual property standpoint. And then number three, the challenge with a lot of those options are they're not super transparent in terms of how they work. And so it exacerbates a trust problem within the ad space that is already pretty endemic.
Can I jump in? There are so many threads in this, and it is so complicated. And this is why we all need to put our minds to it, and we have to start, and it won't be perfect on day one. And, there's a lot of work to be done here, okay? But let me put it to you like this, and Alyssa, I really enjoyed the way you put this. Is that how many times in the last 25 years has a multi-billion dollar 72% net profit margin business been available for $1? Yeah. How many times have we had a situation where a product that impacts 4 billion people multiple times a day is looking for a new owner decided by a government that is going to force the current owner to sell it. I mean, it just doesn't happen. Okay, this is an epoch moment for the creation of the future. And so I think that it's really interesting what happens next. I have some predictions, and I'm interested in whether you think I'm completely mad. The first thing is that I cannot see a world where a big tech company gets the opportunity to acquire this, because it automatically creates another monopoly. Yes, no?
Am I allowed to answer with something longer than yes or no?
Of course.
So I think, because I think this is an important point that gets missed, at least in the proposal, the way the plaintiffs have structured their proposal. Both plaintiffs have to approve the buyer, as well as the judge has to approve the buyer. So that means the Department of Justice and the state attorneys general, whoever comes forward and is the final candidate, they both have to approve. And you heard literally at the trial the lead state AG attorney say Microsoft is not buying Chrome. So I think you already have a flavor of where their thinking is there, and they don't need to give a reason. They can just say no. I mean, there are certain criteria that the buyer has to meet under their proposal, but they can deny this to anyone on grounds based on their own reasoning. So I think that's like a pretty strong safeguard against, frankly, a bunch of the doomsday scenarios that people have here.
Hmm. And so people then said to me, well, a private equity company will buy it because, they're really, really keen to buy it. So, and then I immediately heard responses from that saying, well, hang on a minute, they have to reinvest in building this product. That's part of the rule here. It's not about profit taking. So that feels like it's unlikely. Is that fair? Would you agree with that reasoning?
Well, I would give again like just the additional color of like there's human beings involved here. And I think the people prosecuting this case and the judge deciding it, like their legacy is bound up in this as well. Like what do they want to be known for? And similar to the way that the judge in AT&T and IBM and Xerox and all these other cases, like what are they known for? Right. So I think that if they are in a decisional position over this, like that will bear on them. And do they want to be known for selling Chrome to private equity? What do you think?
Good. So I agree.
I tend to agree. I think where you're going with this, Ricky, is that okay? You've taken Microsoft off the table, or at least Colorado's AG did. By the way, apparently that came out of nowhere. I think it surprised the entire courtroom from everybody that I've talked to. And then you've taken private equity off the table. But then, okay, so who's left?
Right, so there were two more. So the next calls I got were from a collection of European governments that said, well, do you think we could pitch for it? Because there is a very strong feeling. I'm less US focused than the rest of you on this call, and I will point out that the US population is 4% of the global population and doesn't own the web. Okay, it's a world wide web. The clue's in the first word. And I think that you'll find that many European countries, and certainly the EU, would take the view that if they don't get what they want from this, they'll create a splinter net. And I can tell you of at least one major European superpower that's already looking at what would happen if it removed .com and just organized a centralized national internet. Okay, so just be ready for what might be the implications of this outside the US jurisdiction. So these governments were asking me what was the likelihood that the US government might try to take over the internet, or what would happen in that scenario. Okay, so that is a bit of a, I can see both of you rubbing your chins and thinking, oh, hang on a minute. So, clearly that has some serious implications. So maybe, unless you want to volunteer a thought on that, but I can tell you that that's certainly a discussion that's taking place outside the US. So you may say that that's just not going to happen. Your faces are telling me that you'd probably want to think a little bit more about that. But if what Alan's alluding to is that in my personal analysis, if it's not going to be big tech, okay, and if it's not going to be private equity, and if it's not going to be government, then who is the most likely fourth contender for this space? Maybe this isn't so much about who everybody's talking about, but who's most likely when you analyze it like that. The fourth most likely industry, in my opinion, that's best placed to take it over is the content industry, because it generates a lot of the content of the web, and it's federated and it's distributed and it's global. It's existed for a century. It already adheres to laws. It's already got rules and regulations in place around quality and editorial and so forth. And so my personal opinion is that a consortium of the world's publishers should be the custodian. I'm very careful about using the word owner, the custodian of the future of the web. That's what I'd like to see happen. I appreciate it would be complicated, but am I completely out of my mind? What do you think?
Well, I'll just jump in here and say, in the absence of an option that to me seems like a slam dunk, I think that the content industry is certainly one that's worth some consideration. I'd be curious, Eric or Alyssa, if are we missing? Like, is there another group that we should be thinking about in terms of who might be the custodian of Chrome? Or do you think maybe it's just a
The AI
non-Microsoft?
companies.
I'm sorry?
The AI companies. They're building browsers. They
Yeah.
expressed interest at trial. I mean, I don't know if you consider them as part of big tech or whatever, but they're privately owned startups. So
Perplexity. I mean, it's interesting though, because their approach to reinventing a browser seems to be to turn it into a piece of trackware in a way that I think would have horrified people 15 or 20 years ago. Now, I may just be adopting an old school way of thinking about this, but that's clearly what their CEO seems to want to do with Comet. No?
I was just saying, if you were asking for like another category, that was the one that was left out. I'm not expressing a view about whether
Okay.
it's like a viable category or not, but it's clearly like it's on people's minds, and they're building browsers. So it seems like a natural one to include.
Yeah, they're certainly going to bid, assuming we get to that point.
Yeah, so here's my take on this, right? I cannot see them giving it to an AI company, all right? And it's just my opinion. But I'll tell you what my reasoning of that is that we have a situation at the moment in that AI has not expanded at the pace it should have expanded because the general public don't yet trust it, okay? We don't have mass adoption. We have the amazing product, okay? But it's not yet trusted by the average person in the street. Amongst the tech industry, there's a completely different opinion. But we have this thing in Australia, it's called kind of the pub test. If I walked into a pub and asked all the people in the pub if they trusted AI today, 90% of them would say no. And so we can't have mass adoption until people generally trust the product. And the product is being built at the moment for profit, not for people. And that is delaying its adoption. So by giving, there is no doubt whatsoever that the information that's contained, controlled, discovered, and distributed on Chrome is the largest LLM in the world and absolutely should be used to create the next generation of AI. 150%, totally agree. But the problem is if it's being built solely for profit by an AI company that's trying to quadruple its valuation in the next 3 years to crush all of its other competition, that's not the right motivation to build the best product for the people. And it puts you back into the same situation where this is a decision for private equity, VC, tech, surveillance, and so forth. And we just regenerate the same problem. So I think personally that the future of trusted AI is going to be based on the production of great content for the web that then trains the AI. So if you come back to the foundational piece that makes that happen, I think the web should be controlled by a custodian of the content creators, because ultimately you go to the web to find content. And if you don't have content, you don't have a web. So we've kept you on this call for quite a long time because it's so important. Oh my goodness, I could talk about it for the next 2 days, but I won't do that to you. I hope we can catch up again. We have a lot of work to do. We have a job to do. Alan and I talk about this a lot. Our responsibility is to try and offer new ideas to the people that are going to have the really difficult job here. I'm going to ask you one question to close out. What's the number one priority that has to happen next? What has to happen first? Alyssa, is it to wait for the court's decision? What do you think is the immediate next step?
Yeah, I mean, this decision is coming soon, possibly within weeks, and that will tell us a lot about the scope of the future opportunity to, reignite competition in the search market and potentially have these knock-on effects in the browser market. So Judge Meta's judgment will be determinative of everything that comes afterward, including, honestly, intervention from other authorities abroad. Like we saw the CMA in the UK is essentially waiting to see what goes into this judgment before acting in the UK.
Yeah. And
We've seen
Canada
that
and
sort of
Australia.
effect. And
Yeah.
yeah. So all eyes on the court here, and definitely anxiously waiting for that judgment.
Eric, what do you think? What's the thing you're waiting on?
I mean, fundamentally, it's the same as Alyssa, which is, I think, this decision. I mean, if this were 6 months out, then I think there'd be a lot of work to do to try to figure out like how to handle the various options. But given that we're weeks out, it hardly seems worth like spending a lot of time trying to scheme on like what you do in case A versus case B. I think the question of you were just hitting on, I think, the most important question. If there is a decision the Google wants to divest Chrome, figuring out who should be the custodian of Chrome is like the key question. If there's such a divestiture, and I would just say that from the perspective of someone who worked on browsers a long time, the browser is the user's agent, and the most important thing is that whoever becomes the custodian of Chrome, that they think their first allegiance is to the users.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying that. Really, from the bottom of my heart. Alan, which bit are you waiting for?
Yeah, I'm waiting till the end of August when the decision comes back. And the only thing I would add is if they don't agree to divest Chrome, I don't know what the point of the rest of this stuff is. And you're going to be back in antitrust court in a couple of years.
I 100% agree. And I was going to say the same thing. The only piece that I'm interested in, and the piece I'm really focused on is I want to know if the technical committee is going to happen and who those people are on that technical committee are going to be. Those people are going to become overnight the most important people, some of the most important people in the world for 4 billion people. Okay. And so I'm thrilled and I can't wait. And I wish I could fast forward. It's like a great drama that I want to read the last page of first. Thank you so much for spending so much time to discuss this. I'm sure we're going to talk again. I would really like us to talk again. There is so much to do here. And thank you so much for your work and your thoughtful analysis.
Thanks to both of you.
Yeah, thank you. This was really fun.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for tuning in. The Future Media Podcast is a production of Future Media and Ricky Sutton.